on Europe under circumstances, and I hope that that will get Conservative support. And by doing that, we'll begin to show that there is not just the Liberals that have to be looked after, there are Conservatives.
Meanwhile, in Westminster, the Liberal Democrats were holding their own inquest into the Oldham East and Saddleworth by-election. Liberal Democrats ministers held one of their regular meetings behind closed doors here in the Palace of Westminster. Item 1 on the agenda, unsurprisingly, was the by-election. But the second item on the agenda was discussing a much bigger theme, how the Liberal Democrats could become more equal partners within the coalition. But senior ministers who attended the meeting here deny the accusation that the Lib Dem tail is wagging the Conservative bulldog.
Look, coalition government is a coalition between Liberal Democrats and Conservatives. There are bound to be people in each party at any given time saying the other side are getting a better deal. That's nonsense. The reality is ministers are very focused on delivering on the overall agreement that we've made, which is an excellent agreement, excellent coalition objectives, most importantly to put in place the foundations for our renewed economic prosperity and for jobs and for new businesses.
I'm delighted to have won, thank you very much.
Labour are still celebrating their by-election win. For some Conservatives, they'd prefer to see the Lib Dems triumph where their own party can't. So some influential voices are saying informal but closer cooperation between the two parties at Westminster by-elections should now be under active consideration.
I think it's right that we, as a party, try and avoid, I think, the unhelpful media speculation as to whether the Conservative Party was backpedalling or not. And that sort of media speculation, no doubt, will occur in the future. And that's why I think we need a debate as to when the Liberal Democrats are perhaps second to the Labour Party, or indeed the Conservative Party are second to the Labour Party, whether there should be a closer cooperation between the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives. Now, this would be for Westminster by-elections alone.
To others, any talk of electoral cooperation rather than competition between the two coalition partners needs to be dampened down if the parties are to preserve their distinct identities.
Well, I'm joined now by our political panel with Peter Hyman, who worked at Number 10 for Tony Blair, Ollie Grenda, who was formerly Communications Director for the Lib Dems, and Danny Finkelstein, who's now a Times columnist, but who formerly worked at Conservative Central Office. Danny, the Lib Dem share of the vote went up, and you argued in your blog today, however, they could be in mortal danger. Can you explain why that's not just being perverse?
Absolutely. I mean, the polling the Times did suggested that Conservatives voted Liberal Democrat to stop Labour winning, but that a portion of the Liberal vote went to Labour because that portion was always on the left and was cross with the Liberals for joining up with the Conservatives. That means that there is a proportion that Labour will gain, even though Ed Miliband's widely perceived as quite a weak leader. And so, therefore, the Labour Party is strengthened by that. It also means the result, I think, isn't as good as it looks for the Liberal Democrats, that I think they will struggle in places where it's not obvious immediately, and that's, for example, in general elections rather than by-elections, that they have a second party.
So do you buy that, Ollie, that you actually, it looks OK in paper, but actually you could be in real trouble here?
Well, the apocryphal talk several weeks ago about this by-election and the outcome that the Lib Dems would have has not been proven to be the case. I mean, I think certainly what happened with the Conservatives is that a lot of Conservative voters did go over to the Lib Dems, but that's because we're in a classic first-past-the-post system where there's bound to be a squeeze on whatever is perceived to be the third party in that three-way fight. I mean, when the electoral system changes, which I certainly hope it will from spring onwards after a vote, I think it will start to look more complicated than the way that Danny has described.
But shouldn't the Lib Dems have done better, given the circumstances in which the by-election was called and the fact that they could choose the date and all the rest of it?
Or shouldn't they have done worse, Peter? Because, I mean, you know, Nick Clegg's had terrible publicity for months. Everything from tuition fees, now VAT and so on.
No, but they went to the High Court because it was only a matter of 100 votes in it. They thought this was a very tight marginal they should have won, and obviously Labour increased its share. But where I agree with Danny is I think they're not going to win this against Labour in the Labour Lib Dem marginals as a problem. I don't see them winning in the Conservative Lib Dem marginals because they're both in the coalition and they'll go for the Conservative. So I share Danny's view that actually this is looking bad long term for the Lib Dems.
Let's just talk about
which is remarkable coming from Peter, because I've never heard him do apocryphal stuff about the Lib Dems before.
Never before.
Note the sarcasm.
What about the Conservatives? I mean, is there real trouble for David Cameron on the right wing?
Well, there certainly is a lot of discontent, actually. I think it was much less in summer and in the autumn and a bit stronger in January. Personally speaking, I think the idea that the Conservative Party would improve its position by becoming more right-wing, either in the general election or now, is eccentric. It's an entertaining notion as far as I'm concerned. But it's certainly
fighting
there.
a bit harder would seem to be the point, not being more right-wing, just fight the election.
Well, look, I think that the Conservative Party was in a difficult position. If you fought the by-election, you'd probably have ended up coming third anyway, because voters aren't stupid. They would have done what Ollie said. They would have voted Liberal Democrat as a tactical vote, and you would have ended up looking as though you tried and came third, as opposed to not trying and come third.
Why put up a candidate and then hope that
this is interesting,
the candidate loses?
I think one of the reasons for that is because I don't suppose the Liberal Democrats would reciprocate this concession if you didn't run it. So I think that one of the issues for the Conservatives is, will they be able to make this vote that went from Conservatives to Liberal two-way? Can they get the Liberal Democrats to reciprocate?
Except that what the Liberal Democrats believe in, and have talked about for a long time, is they believe in a multi-party system. They believe in coalitions. They believe it is possible for political parties to work together. Therefore, it is utterly incomprehensible to move down the route of trying to pull together parties for an electoral process. They believe in pacts and they believe in political parties working. They believe in parties working together within government. But they also believe in the electorate having an opportunity to vote for different political parties. Happens in Scotland, happens in Wales,
forward and not wanting them to win.
happens elsewhere in Europe.
But I think it's because
it's
early.
just standard stuff. It's that we're not used to it here.
But I think it's because it's early
UK.
days for the coalition. I think in a year or two there'll be more of an agreement of exactly the strategy.
There'll be more of an agreement,
and it hadn't really been thrashed out. And it hadn't really been thrashed out this time.
Anyone who has lived through the SDP merger and the Liberal merger knows just how difficult this is, and blithely saying that it is possible like that. In
things have changed fundamentally for the Liberals. Things have changed fundamentally.
Sorry, Danny, but I mean, Mark Pritchard there, he didn't use the word electoral pact, but he did suggest it would be common sense for the parties to work more closely together, which is the opposite.
I'm against making any decisions about that until we know what the electoral system's going to be. The electoral system fundamentally alters this decision. Do you have a system whereby you can cast a tactical vote inside the system through an alternative vote or not? And we just don't know. So you don't want to make those decisions now. And the other thing is, for the Conservative Party to decide on its own that it's going to stand down for the Liberal Democrats is one thing. For the Liberal Democrats might not reciprocate, and the reason they might not reciprocate is because there's a lot of independent feeling inside the party. It'd be harder for them to do that.
Peter, just to move on to Labour, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I mean, this has nothing to do with Ed Miliband, really, did it?
No, I think he fought a very good campaign, and I think Labour is looking sharper. And Ed is a good campaigner. I mean, he beat his brother in the leadership election, so I think he's still underestimated, which doesn't mean he's not got a lot to do. And I've said before that he needs to, on the economy where he's edging slowly to the right position, he's got to do a huge amount of work, and he needs a long-term strategy for this Parliament. I would sum up his strategy for this Parliament. It needs to be 70% the economy, winning back credibility, 30% getting on to the future and having something really strong to say about the future, which incidentally, just on the future, I think is still the weakness of this coalition. They've got a short-term mission on austerity and cuts. They haven't yet got a vision for the future.
Would his credibility be aided by having a chancellor, a shadow chancellor, who's a master of his brief? Alan Johnson, in other words, be moved out?
My personal view is, and I've got great respect for Alan Johnson, is Ed Balls, whatever his policy difference, would actually go after George Osborne better.
After he's gone after Ed Miliband first, that's the problem.
Well, no, I agree with that. But I think he'd give George Osborne more of a run for his money.
When a moment comes when Peter Hyman thinks that Ed Balls is the answer to the question, you know the answer on the Alan Johnson problem, don't you? If the situation has reached it where they have to reach, that's like reaching for the revolver and the whiskey, I think.
OK, well, it's going to be an interesting couple of months. Thanks very much. Now, next week, the government's expected to publish its health bill for England. Nothing short, it says, of a revolution in healthcare. For the first time, GPs will have the freedom to spend a budget of close to £8 billion as they see fit. Or will they? Is it merely a means, as some critics claim, to privatise the NHS by the back door? Already a number of GP groups have signed contracts with multinational private health companies. Matt Prodger has been to Somerset, where the plans are already far advanced.
Blackbrook Medical Centre in Taunton. 9 GPs serving 10,000 patients, and just now it's in the midst of a healthcare revolution. Thanks, Ray. Dr Harry Yoxall's been here for nearly 30 years and is well ahead with plans for his GPs for the first time to take control of their £10.5 million annual budget. His is a pathfinder surgery tasked with pioneering the government's plans.
I think there are mixed feelings, there are wild enthusiasts, there are people who are very hesitant. Taken as a whole, I think there is lukewarm enthusiasm.
Far from placing an administrative burden on doctors, he believes the reforms will cut out bureaucracy and improve patient care.
I think it'll mean that we'll be able to talk to our consultant colleagues and reach agreements on the best way forward. So it'll mean the GP is at the centre of decisions, sitting between the patient on one side and acting as their advocate, and the rest of the clinical professions, the consultant colleagues and all the other people who provide NHS services. So the GP will be the pivot in organisational terms as well as they are at the moment in medical terms.
What's interesting when you come to GPs' practices like this across the country is how advanced they already are in their plans. Even as the debate is still rumbling on about whether this amounts to privatisation by the back door, GPs are getting ready to handle £80 billion worth of funding themselves. Research by the medical magazine Pulse suggests that 60% of the first wave of GP consortia are already working with the private sector. Some have contracted out the management of referrals for hospital treatment and systems for monitoring high-risk patients. Others are talking about financial support services and administrative, so-called back-office functions.
A number of the examples are ones where the private company is acting in some way either to decide on priorities for care, so to decide which patients get targeted for treatment, or to decide whether those patients get admitted to hospital. And these deals are potentially controversial because if a private company is incentivised, has the potential of profit for its shareholders if it delivers a cut in the number of patients who go to hospital, then obviously it has an interest in enforcing efficiency measures that you could argue might not be in a patient's best interest.
In Somerset, the consortium of GPs admits at the moment to being deluged by offers of help from private healthcare companies and consultants. Paul Behrman is the man they approach.
The private sector are obviously very interested in what's going on because it's an £80 billion business, and I'm sure they would like to have a bigger slice of it than they've got at the moment. So yes, they are very interested.
So are you getting emails daily from companies saying, please, how can we help you?
Absolutely, yeah, very, very much so, yes.
And your response, do you see a role for them?
There will be a role for them because the health service can't do everything, and there may be ways of things being done more efficiently and effectively than they are at the moment.
Yesterday, the management consultancy KPMG announced it was leading a group of private companies which has just signed a deal with NHS London to help develop GP consortia across the capital. In perhaps a sign of the times, the man in charge of the KPMG operation was until last year a senior commissioning official at the Department of Health. The British Medical Association believes that far from liberating doctors, the legislation will in fact force them to choose private contractors whether they want to or not.
The idea that I and my patient together are going to arrange care in some way is a nonsense. You can't arrange spending 80 billion quid like that. And I think that patients have been a bit misled there, but the real misleading is on the regulation that is going to force the private sector to advise on the process and provide the care. And the people advising government are the private sector.
Radical changes are afoot in the NHS, everyone agrees. But it's that familiar question once again. Is it for the big society or big business?
Roger. Just before we go, Martin Luther King Day will be celebrated on Monday, when we'll be joined by a close friend of Dr. King, who helped to write his most famous speech. What other speeches deserve to be ranked alongside I Have a Dream? We'd like you to tell us what you think. Details of how to send your nominations are on our website. And a quick look at the markets. BP shares rose tonight after the company announced that the Russian government-owned oil firm Rosneft is to take a 5% stake in the company as part of a groundbreaking share swap deal. On the FTSE 100, share index was down. In New York, the Dow Jones was up. Against the euro, the pound was marginally down. Against the dollar, the pound was up. And tomorrow morning's front pages, the FT leads on the Tunisia story. Tunisian president swept from power, but underneath it's got a story here about the Crown Prosecution Service is to re-examine all the evidence over the news of the world phone hacking. The Guardian has actually the same two stories on the front page. Popular revolt in Tunisia forces president to flee. End of one of the most repressive Arab regimes. What next? And also full review ordered into Met's phone hacking evidence. The Telegraph has early rise in interest rates, it says, to